Good morning, folks. I'm Donald Ware, here to introduce Ralph Ring. I know probably 90-some people who have been on board alien vehicles many times. I know one lady who said that she was asked to use her mind to help control one, but Ralph Ring is the only person I know who has co-piloted a flying saucer that we made. He has lived in Las Vegas on and off for about 40 years. Please welcome Ralph Ring.
Thank you. You're welcome. Good morning, everybody. Can everybody hear me? I can't see you, but I know you're out there. And I want to be able to thank you all for coming, and I want to thank the Source for all of us being here together. I'm going to talk to you today about a little bit about me and a lot about Nikola Tesla, Otis Carr, and the OTC X-1 spacecraft, which I had the privilege and honor of having a great deal of activity with. I guess it started for me when I was a kid. We lived in the woods in Northern California, at a place called Paradise. It's just up above Chico, California. And we used to walk to school 7 miles round trip every day, my sister and I. And during that time, I learned a lot about natural law, about how things are, how things work. My strongest experience was with an anthill that we ran into. I wanted to pester it with a stick to see what they do. And before I got done, half of my body was stinging all the way home. I realized you don't mess with Mother Nature unless you know what you're doing. And from then on, when we passed the anthill, I had a great deal of respect for them and their home and everything else. And I knew that would have to carry on through my life and everything that I did. So I learned a lot. I went on later to school. I was in science. I really like science, but I like the natural science. And I remember one time I was on the second floor of the high school in Santa Cruz, California, where we were living at the time. And the science teacher, it was physics, and he was saying that aerodynamically a bumblebee can't fly. That was the topic. And I was listening to him, and at that moment on the second floor of the classroom, I was looking out the window, and there was a big black bumblebee with yellow stripes around staring at me in the window. And I said, which one of you guys... I couldn't figure it out. So I made a choice and decided to go learn more from nature than I was learning in school. And so I kind of graduated back out into the woods, and I met a good friend of mine. In fact, his brother and I worked with Otis Carr in the Apple Valley when we developed the spaceships. His name was Arthur Aho, and he wrote a book. I don't know if it's still in print or not, but it was called Tomorrow's Energy Need Not Be Fuel. Tomorrow's Energy Need Not Be Fuel. And one of the chapters in there was on bumblebees. And so I became acquainted with him, and we got into the mechanics of what bumblebees do. And it was quite simple. Aerodynamically speaking, and giving credit to my science teacher, they don't fly. But they do levitate. And how they levitate is quite simple. They have next to their larynx a little hollow cavity, just a little shaft. And they start beating their wings, and they start changing their frequency of their environment. And when they get to the frequency of their surrounding. And as an analogy, I'll use the Earth's frequency of 8.5 cycles per second. When they reach that frequency and resonate in that cavity, that beating of the wings, they reach what's called 0 point. They are no longer captivated by the surrounding gravity. They are then capable of going wherever they want to go. They have their own little bubble of gravity around them that they can do anything with. So that intrigued me and, of course, fascinated me quite a bit. And then I later learned about hummingbirds, and hummingbirds do similarly the same thing, and there's some lizards that do the same thing. So I had always been interested in magnetics. And I went on and went into the military. I went into in 48, I went into the Army in Fort Ord, California. They eventually shipped us out to Guam. I kept putting in for engineering school, and they said, no, infantry, and they kept kicking me back to the infantry. So while we were on Guam, Korea broke out, and we were in the middle of the night, rushed out, and we made the Woncham landing in North Korea. And that was quite an experience of what we can do to each other, the harm, the killing, the maiming. It was an incredible experience for me, and I became an objector to killing, and I admit I fired my guns, but I think they all went in the air because I didn't want to shoot anybody, and it bothered me. Well, anyway, make a long story short, I got out of the service, and I was in the 3rd Division, 7th Regimental Combat Team, which their whole function was heavy weapons. They had machine guns and mortars, 4.2 mortars, and big heavy artillery, 1.5 heavy artillery. So when I got out of the service, I was wondering, what am I going to do? I couldn't go to engineering school like I wanted to, and I didn't have the money then to go back. But while I was on Guam, I had learned to, in my leisure time, to go down to the beaches, and I started snorkeling and skin diving. And it was wonderful. It was a whole new world that opened up to me. I realized there was everything I didn't know about life, and I wanted to learn more. And it was all natural, so I was in my element. So when I got out, I started a skin diving business, scuba diving business in San Francisco, California. And at that time, there was a large company, Podesta Divers, that did deep sea diving work, but they couldn't handle the little stuff. So I merged with them a little while, and then I went off on my own, and I got into research and development. I got into recovery, repair. I worked for insurance companies on different claims underwater that they need to have proof of. And then I went to Northern California on mining expeditions. We used suction dredges to dredge the bottom of creeks for gold. And we did pretty good. We had a lot of fun doing that. Well, anyway, I'd been wounded in Korea. I got wounded 4 times, and I had frostbite. Both my feet were frozen, my hands. And that was kind of I never really got over that. I still had limps and bad circulation in my feet well, I still do. But I had family down in Newport Beach, California, which is Southern California. That's down near San Diego. And so I progressively moved down the coast and started diving off the coast there for all kinds of things, even abalone diving. I did a lot of diving. I met my first wife down there, and we got married and had children. And I continued to dive for a while, and the type of diving I was doing interested some people one day on an adjacent boat, and they came over and asked me what I was interested in diving, and I told them that I was a research diver, that I like to learn and develop techniques. Well, the boat that pulled up alongside of me was from U.S. Divers Corporation, and that was Jacques Cousteau's company that developed the Aqualung. And they were located at that time in Santa Ana, California, which was adjacent to, well, just close to Newport Beach. And my family and I lived in Costa Mesa, which was close to Santa Ana. So they asked me if I'd be interested in joining them in the research and development department. And I was very excited about that. I thought that would be a wonderful opportunity. So I got in there, and then my curiosity and creative part of me started creating ideas that we could use. And eventually, I had the honor of being offered a position of head diver on the Calypso that was going to be on the West Coast. He already had one on the East Coast and was traveling around the Caribbean and so forth. So I thought that was I'd just do that for the rest of my life. That was going to be fun. Well, in my work, my particular job at that time was the wraparound mask. They had a mask that had distortions, and you couldn't quite see out of the corners of them. And I was diving off of Catalina Island. We'd go out for 2 and 3 or 4 or 5 days at a time, checking out different things. And mine was a mask, and I had to check it for leaks and pressure and so forth. Well, my wife got kind of nervous because I've had some close calls. I went down too deep and ran out of air, and I had to come back up. And there was a few things with the elements that I ran into that kind of scared her, and we stayed out a little too long to suit her and my kids. So she said, "No, we need you more domesticated. The kids need you. You've got a family here." And she had a valid point, but I didn't know what to say. That's all I'd ever learned. Well, she picked up a newspaper one day, and it was an advertisement. It was an ad for a research and development technician, a lab tech, at a place called Advanced Kinetics, and that was located in Costa Mesa, California. And she said, "They're looking for a lab tech." And I told her, I don't have any experience. I don't have those credentials. And she said, "Well, you've got all the credentials in the world about your tinkering. You stay up every night, all night long, tinkering with things, and your interest and findings in natural law. I think you should go talk to him." So, make a long story short, I did. I went over, and it was lunchtime when I got there, and there was nobody around. The receptionist wasn't even there, and I was walking down the hall, and I went by the director's office. His name was Dr. Weinhoff, and he happened to be in his office, and he said, "Well, what are you doing?" And I told him, and he said, "Come in, sit down, and what's your qualifications?" And I said, "You got me, goodbye." And he said, no, sit down. And I said, "Well, I love natural law. I think if we all could live by natural law, there would never be any problems, because you know what to expect, you know what to do, and you're always guided in the right direction." And I told him about the bumblebee and the lizards and the snakes, everything that I'd done to learn about it, and that my primary interest in life was magnetics. I was fascinated with magnetism. Well, he said, just 2 weeks ago, we had one of our technicians leave, or he was an engineer. He was working on a project that we have that happens to deal with magnetism. And would you be interested? And I said, well, sure, but I haven't filled out an application. He said, no, are you interested? And I said, yeah. He said, go to work tomorrow morning. So I went home and told my wife, and she was elated. She was, oh, money in the bank again. So, and they were paying pretty good money, but I was flabbergasted. I couldn't believe that he hired me on just my honest truth. That's what got me in there. Well, the experiment that I was working on was, and this was in 1955, I think, or around in the mid-50s, was how to get rockets, spaceships, or anything through these rivers of space that are called magnetic fields. They're vortices in space. And we had to get, my job was to get an electron, just one little tiny electron, through the field, through this magnet, all the way through without deflection, without going to the positive side or the negative side of the magnet. I had a giant super oscilloscope. I had the best cameras available with high-speed cameras that I could take pictures of each time I fired an electron, and a big cathode ray tube that fired the electrons. It's the same thing on your television set that fires, well, now that you've gone digital, it's a little different, but it fires the electrons to the screen, the phosphorus, and it lights up. And these are just the little electrons that are firing. So anyway, I started firing these electrons and taking hundreds and hundreds of pictures every day, and no luck. I couldn't get this electron through the field. And I thought they were going to say something about it, but they just came by and praised me. You're doing a good job, fine, and everything. And I said, well, no, there's an easier way to do this. You guys are using force to get this electron through. And I learned from my experience, you don't force Mother Nature. You understand what's going on, and you work with her if you want to get anywhere. Otherwise, you're chasing your tail. You're going around and around in circles, same old thing. And so, I used an analogy that nature, when she brings water down from the mountains out of the snow, meanders the water. She always goes this way, and it's always refreshing itself. Nitrogen, oxygen, it's pure water. Just every two or 3 feet, you've got pure water. But then I looked at some of the viaducts that humans that we have made that go from Northern California all the way down to Southern California, and they're in straight lines. And it's kind of dead water. It doesn't have the same punch to it. So anyhow, to make a long story short, I knew in my mind I could do better than what they were doing by using natural law. The next bench over for me was they were working on levitation. And what they had was these giant coils. They're just an iron core with copper windings around it. They're about this high, and a steel ball. And they would fire it up with low voltage, and they would increase the voltage till they got the steel ball to levitate for 4 to 8 minutes. And then it would burn out the coil. Well, in those days, this is in the 50s, they'd have to go to supply and get another coil about every hour at least, and they were $400 a copy, and they'd burn up 15 or 20 coils a day. And I thought, this is getting expensive. There's a more natural way to levitation than what they're doing. I just felt it. So, and then we were working on teleportation. Another part of it was, and this was a government-funded research facility. And So we had all these projects with lasers and everything was going on in the lab. Well, because I was a tinker and so forth, I'd had a lot of junk in my garage and at home. And I did a lot of garage sailing and getting parts, taking things apart and seeing how they work. I went home and in one night, well, actually it might have been 2 nights, I put together the experiment that I was working on in the lab. I took a television apart, I got the cathode ray tube out, the little gun that fires electrons, and I built magnets, positive and negative side of the magnets, universal. And then I mounted a little camera. I had my own little Polaroid camera. And I knew from watching the water come down the hill that if you spiral something, you'll have results. But if you try to force it, you're going to jam up, just like pouring water out of a bottle. If you spin the bottle, that water will come out a lot faster than if you just wait for it to clug, and gasp for air. So anyway, I pulsed the signal. I set the audio amplifier and everything up, and I just pulsed the signal. And the first electron that I fired through that field went all the way through without deflection. It went completely through the field. So I tried it at least 20, 30 more times, and no problem. Not once did it ever go to the negative or positive side. So I thought, well, here comes my raise. I'm gonna, I'll get something out of this. This is simple. There's nothing to it. With $50 worth of stuff, I've done the same thing that they're trying to do. So I then looked at their levitation device that they were using, the coil and so forth, and knew I could do better. And I had read about the Eastern, in Tibet, the acoustical levitation they used to use to move giant rocks up and down the sides of mountains. And so I knew that sound and magnetics are really one and the same. They're just different frequencies away. It's the same with light, the same with color. Everything is in frequencies. Everything is everything without exception. Because it's all one. It's all one thing, and it's dissected as you use it. So I took a 15-inch woofer speaker and laid it on the carpet on my living room floor. I took an audio amplifier that I bought at a garage sale probably, and I started experimenting with different objects in the center of the cone. I put all kinds of stuff. And I eventually wound up with a ping pong ball. And I put it in the center of the cone, and I was fooling around, and I got to, and this is a guess because I don't remember, I got to about 28,000 cycles. That's in the frequency that this ping pong ball liked, because it came up and stood right in the center of the cone. I couldn't hear anything, but it was there, and I could push it down, it'd come back up, it'd stay right there. The same thing that you see now with water, you can levitate a giant weight with water, or a hairdryer. If you take a hairdryer and put a ping pong ball on it, you can levitate the ping pong ball. Well, different things of the same thing is what it amounts to, and this was acoustical levitation. So I went to bed. My wife had come to bed. It was late, as always, at night. So I went to bed, and I woke up in the morning, and it was still there. It was still hovering. So I took pictures of that and wrote up an experiment sheet. And I took both these experiments into Dr. Weinhardt. And I said, I'm ready for a raise. I think I got something here. At least we can throw it to the engineers and see what they come up with, but I think we got something we can work with because it's doing it. And it doesn't cost that much. Well, he told me to come in and sit down, close the door, and he halted the calls, and he said, Ralph, I didn't think you'd I didn't think he'd get into that. He says, I know. He was a famous, he's a full-fledged doctor of physics. And he said, I know it's that simple. I know it's that simple. But there's something you don't understand. You're working here for a government-funded research and development. And he said, we're paid to look for the answers, but not to find them. So my world fell apart. I didn't know what to do. Because my background, my education and everything were limited, so I didn't know what the heck to do. But I thought I was, going to go somewhere with this. Well, he said, I'm really sorry, but I'm going to have to shred this. I'm going to have to ask you not to talk about it and go back to work. Go back. So I did. I went back on my little project, and I lasted 2 more weeks. I just couldn't take it. I almost cried when I went into work the last day that I finally left, because it was redundant. It was ridiculous. It was absolutely boring, because it was like a dog chasing its tail. It was going around and around and around, and we weren't getting anywhere, and we never would, according to what I was told. They didn't want that, So I didn't know what to do, and I went home and told my wife. She wasn't happy about the fact that I wasn't working there anymore. But in the interim, I had met a few people that I started talking to about what had happened to me, and they said, why don't you come over? We've got a gang of people over here, a group of people. There's about 15 or 20 of us that meet every week. And the name of the group was called Understanding. That was it, an Understanding. And it was created eventually by a guy by the name of Daniel Fry in California, for the sole purpose of people getting together and kind of brainstorming, trying to put the pieces of the puzzle together so that we could understand what the heck's going on with ourselves and with our environment. And so I went over there and I started talking about everything I'd learned from nature, which is, you could build a garden that will take care of itself. It would feed and water itself when necessary. You could go away on trips. It would completely take care of itself and ripen everything for you by the time you got back. And I had 100 different ideas that they liked. And in turn, I got 100 different ideas from them. And everybody there had an open mind, if you will. They loved life as it is, and not like we tried to make it. So they said, "Well, you're interested in magnetics," and I had a mission that since childhood I always envisioned us having floating homes, if you will. Homes that we could go anywhere in the world, around the globe that we live in. This itself is a giant spaceship, if you will, the Earth. And I knew that we could build homes that we could live in with everything self-contained, with the gardens, with everything you needed on board, that we could go anywhere. You could go to China for Chinese dinner. We could go to Russia for stroganoff. And so I told him about this, and he said, wait a minute, you're talking about a guy that we know of that's in trouble right now, and his name is Otis Carr, and he's in Norman, Oklahoma, demonstrating what you're trying to get it across to people, that the simplicity of a spaceship, of spacecraft, using magnetics. So they said, we're going to bring both of you guys together because you came out of the same pod. So they did. They asked Mr. Carr and his entourage. He had about 6 or 7 other people with him. He left Oklahoma because the experiments that he was working on, there was a an accident with mercury that spilled, and he was getting some bad rap or some bad publicity because he was getting too close to the truth of how simple this was. And at that time, the powers that be didn't really want it to go any further than that. So they were giving him a hard time. So the group, understanding, brought